Welcome to Uncovered Biblical History and Traditions, the channel dedicated to lost stories of the biblical past. Discover stories of pre-Christian historical roots, biblical legends, lost church history, and forgotten historical characters of faith. It is very helpful if you hit the like, subscribe, and share. Help build my channel, and let's take a look together into these uncovered forgotten tales. Welcome back to Uncovered Biblical History and Traditions, where we dive deep into history's most shocking untold biblical stories. I'm your host, and today we're about to shatter everything you think you know about the origins of Christianity in Rome. What if I told you that the first Christian church in Rome wasn't founded by St. Peter? What if the first bishop of Rome wasn't even Roman, but was built by British royalty living in a palace that still stands today? Before you dismiss this as fantasy, know that every word I'm about to share is documented in historical records that the Vatican itself has preserved for nearly 2 millennia. This is the story of the greatest cover-up in Christian history, not because it was hidden, but because it was forgotten. Our story begins with a puzzle that has baffled biblical scholars for centuries. According to Scripture, the Apostle Paul spent only 2 years in his provided home in Rome. Yet historical records show he was connected to the city for an entire 7 years. So where was Paul during those mysterious 7 missing years? Traditional scholars assumed he was imprisoned or in hiding somewhere in the Mediterranean. They were wrong. Paul was traveling back and forth between Rome and Britain, orchestrating what would become the most successful religious revolution in human history. To understand how this is possible, we need to meet one of history's most remarkable women, a British princess whose name has been systematically erased from modern Christian memory. Her name was Claudia, and her story reads like something from a Hollywood thriller. Born into British royalty, she was captured during the Roman conquest of Britain and brought to Rome as a prize of war. But instead of being enslaved, she was adopted by Emperor Claudius himself, becoming part of the imperial family. Claudia married Rufus Pudens, a Roman senator, and together they owned one of the most magnificent residences in Rome, the Palatium Britannicum, the Palace of the British. This wasn't just any house, it was a statement of power, wealth, and influence in the heart of the empire. But here's where the story takes an extraordinary turn. Claudia wasn't just any British princess, she was already a Christian. Years before Paul ever set foot in Rome, she had secretly converted to this dangerous new faith. And she wasn't alone. When Paul finally arrived in Rome, he wasn't walking into unknown territory. His own relatives were already there, waiting for him. Andronicus, Jr., and Herodian, 3 family members who had converted to Christianity and were part of an underground network that had been operating in the capital for years. But Paul's primary destination wasn't some humble house church. He was headed straight to the Palace of the British, where Claudia and Pudens had been secretly hosting Christian gatherings. Under the cover of royal privilege and senatorial immunity, they had created the most audacious safe house in the empire. Imagine the scene when Paul arrived. The battle-scarred apostle, fresh from shipwrecks and beatings, walking through the marble halls of a palace to embrace his sister-in-law Claudia and his half-brother Pudens. Picture the children, future saints and martyrs, gathering around their Uncle Paul as he shared stories of his travels and his vision for the future. This wasn't just a family reunion. It was a strategic summit that would change the course of world history. Paul had come to Rome with a vision. He wanted to establish the first above-ground Christian church in the empire, right under Nero's nose. But this wouldn't be some modest house church tucked away in a back alley. Paul envisioned something that would serve as an indestructible foundation for Christianity among the Gentiles. The plan required unprecedented sacrifice. Claudia and Pudens would have to donate their entire palace, their home, their sanctuary, their symbol of status, to become the first openly declared Christian church in Rome. In an era when being a Christian was a death sentence, this was essentially signing their own execution orders. But here's what makes this story even more incredible: they had been preparing for this moment for years. The Palatium Britannicum had already been functioning as a secret Christian meeting place, with a man named Hermes conducting underground worship services. When Paul arrived, he transformed this clandestine operation into a public declaration of faith. The courage required for this decision cannot be overstated. Nero was already showing signs of the madness that would soon make him infamous. Christians were being arrested, tortured, and executed throughout the empire. Yet this British royal family chose to make their palace the most visible Christian target in Rome. With the church established, Paul faced a crucial decision: who would lead this revolutionary congregation? His choice was inspired and strategic. He selected Linus, the son of Caractacus, the legendary British king who had been captured and brought to Rome during the conquest. Linus wasn't just any convert. He was a prince of royal blood who had been baptized and confirmed by Saint Joseph of Arimathea himself back in Britain. He had been serving as a priestly instructor, preparing for this moment when he would become the first bishop of Rome. This appointment was revolutionary for multiple reasons. First, it meant that the first bishop of Rome was British, not Roman. Second, it established that Paul, not Peter, founded the Roman Church. And third, it created a direct organizational connection between the Christian communities in Britain and Rome. The historical documentation for this appointment is overwhelming and comes from the most authoritative sources imaginable. Saint Peter himself confirmed it in the official church records called the Apostolic Constitutions, stating clearly, "Of the Church of Rome, Linus, brother of Claudia, was first ordained by Paul." Think about that for a moment. Peter himself, the supposed founder of the Roman Church, explicitly stated that he didn't found it, that Paul performed the ordination, and that the first bishop was Claudia's brother, a British prince. Paul had achieved the impossible. The Palatium Britannicum had been officially transformed into the first above-ground Christian church in Rome. The building would eventually be known by 4 different names throughout history, first as the Palace of the British, then as Titulus, then as Hospitium Apostolorum, the Guest House of the Apostles, and finally as St. Pudentiana, the name it bears to this day. But Paul's vision extended far beyond Rome. From this royal headquarters, he was orchestrating Christian missions across the empire. Historical records show that he personally preached in Britain, working in collaboration with the earlier Christian mission that had been established at Glastonbury decades earlier. This wasn't just about converting Romans. This was about creating an international Christian network that could survive the collapse of empires and the persecution of emperors. The cost of this religious revolution was staggering, and it was paid in blood. One by one, every member of this remarkable royal family would sacrifice their lives for their faith. Linus, the first bishop, became the first martyr. His death established a pattern that would define Christian leadership for centuries. The highest office in the church came with the highest probability of death. Claudia watched her brother die, then years later witnessed the execution of her husband Rufus Pudens in 96 AD. She was the only family member to die naturally, but not before seeing her entire family destroyed by Rome. The children's fate was particularly heartbreaking. Pudentiana, the eldest daughter, was executed in 107 AD on the anniversary of her father's death. The church was renamed in her honor, and visitors can still see it today. Novatus, one of the sons, was martyred in 137 AD during the 5th Roman persecution. His brother Timotheus was in Britain at the time, baptizing King Lucius, the grandson of the legendary King Arviragus, when the news reached him. He returned to Rome knowing he would face the same fate, and was executed in his 90th year. Finally, in 140 AD, Praxedes, the youngest daughter and the last surviving member of the family, was executed during a year that Roman historians described as one when Rome was drunk with the blood of martyrs of Jesus. Before his own execution in 66 AD, Paul sent one final message through Timothy to his beloved family. His last words were for Claudia, his sister-in-law, Pudens, his half-brother, their children, whom he had taught, with affection at his knee, and Linus, whom he had personally consecrated as bishop. In a dangerous nighttime operation that paralleled Joseph of Arimathea's retrieval of Jesus' body, Claudia, Pudens, and their children retrieved Paul's mutilated remains from the execution ground and buried him in their private cemetery. Later, all the family members would be interred beside him in the Via Ostiensis, their earthly mission complete. The remarkable thing about this story is that the evidence for it has never been hidden. The Church of St. Pudentiana still stands in Rome today, and visitors can still see the ancient inscription carved into its walls during the 2nd century. In this sacred and most ancient of churches, formerly the house of Sanctus Pudens, the Senator, and the home of the Holy Apostles, repose the remains of 3,000 blessed martyrs. Cardinal Baronius, the official church historian, wrote, "It is delivered to us by the firm tradition of our forefathers that the house Pudens was the first that entertained St. Peter at Rome." The Vatican has consistently endorsed these facts throughout history, and the Encyclopaedia Britannica lists Linus as the first bishop of Rome. This story doesn't just change our understanding of early Christianity, it completely revolutionizes it. It reveals that the first Christian church in Rome was founded not by Peter but by Paul, not by Romans but by British royalty, and not as a Roman Catholic institution but as a Gentile church that wouldn't become Roman Catholic for another 350 years. If you would like more information where to research this subject, check out my other videos and pause this image and look into these resources. If you have book sources or links of your own on this subject, please share in comments or email me. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this forgotten biblical story. Leave a like, comment, share and subscribe. This is very helpful. Join me next time for another lost story of our biblical history. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.